What is the freakiest, creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. I've told this story before, but it's still by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. When I was 16, I had just gotten my driver's license and my first after-school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent lot and take a quick nap. It was a shopping strip with a grocery store, a few restaurants, and a bank on a fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I was sitting there drifting off, I noticed a black Denali pull up behind me, blocking my car into the spot. A man in a business suit jumped out and approached my window. He looked professional enough, and I assumed he was going to ask for directions. He explained that he and his wife were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us to purchase a boat, but she was stuck in a meeting and couldn't make it. Then he asked if I wouldn't mind posing as her and signing the documents in her place. I was completely stunned. I was shy and didn't know how to respond, but I felt like I had to let him down gently. Stupid, I know. I told him I don't think they will believe I am your wife. He said it would be fine. He had her license with him, which he actually showed me. She supposedly had the same hair and eye color as me, so they wouldn't know. That's when I really started freaking out. I began to notice how disheveled he looked. He was sweating, no wedding ring. The whole situation felt off. I just wanted him away from my car, so I started telling him I couldn't help and that he needed to ask someone else. But he kept pushing. "It'll be quick," he said. "Just hop in my truck and I will take you over there." Mind you, the bank was in the same shopping strip. There was absolutely no reason to drive. Even in my gullible teenage mind, I knew this story was total crap. I kept saying no, scanning the parking lot desperately for anyone who might notice. Of course, no one did. He started getting irate, insisting I was perfect for this, calling me beautiful, asking if he could at least take me to dinner. I began rolling up my window, and that's when he reached through, grabbed my shoulder, and tried the door handle. Thankfully, it was locked. I was frozen. I couldn't even react. I couldn't drive away because he was blocking me in. And then, I am not even sure why. I just blurted out, "I am only 16. For some reason, that freaked him out. He backed away slowly, got into his truck, and left. I called the police afterward, but they never followed up. Still, I am convinced he had found that license and made up the whole story as a way to lure women into his truck. It scares the hell out of me to think he might have succeeded before. Years later, I saw him on the S-offender registry. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. When I was about 5, I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mom, dad, and sister. We were walking toward the city center, so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand and then feeling him grab it again a few moments later. I kept walking. I don't know how far, when I suddenly heard my dad shouting from behind me and grabbing my other arm. He said, "Sorry," and I looked up to realize I had been holding hands with an old man I didn't know. My dad assumed I had accidentally grabbed the man's hand, thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away, embarrassed, while I was thinking, but the man grabbed my hand? So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed the wrong hand. My parents were usually pretty paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted while talking to my grandma. Story 3. I was probably about 9 years old, around 1995. At that time, schools and parents were warning us about stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping strangers find a lost pet. One day, I was riding my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street with lots of kids playing and hanging out, when a green two-door car pulled up. A woman was driving, and a man sat in the passenger seat. The man called out the window to me, "Hey kid, we lost our dog. Can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling that washed over me. It was like sirens going off in my head. For a split second, I thought, this is it. I am going to be kidnapped. A rush of burning hot adrenaline coursed through my body. Suddenly, I could hear everything 10 times louder and see everything 10 times clearer. I've never felt anything like that before. I quickly hopped off my bike, lifted the front tire so I could turn around faster, and booked it home. I was shaking, with tears streaming down my face, even though I wasn't crying. When I got home, I told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I am not sure if those people were ever caught. Crazy. Story 4. I was very close to my grandfather. He was easily the best person in my life, an amazing man who went out of his way to be supportive and connected. He wrote me letters all the time. We stayed at their house often. He encouraged my education and would send workbooks, novels, and more for me. He had worked in education until he retired, serving as a school district superintendent. He truly believed in the importance of early childhood education and reading. He was deeply involved in my learning and was a very positive influence. He died when I was 14, and I was devastated. His death changed a lot in our family dynamics. He had always been the head of the family. My dad, his son, was an alcoholic. I struggled with depression during that difficult time, and I missed my grandfather terribly. When I was 25, my first child was born. We named her Raven, a name not very common here in Canada. When she was about 4 or 5, I was browsing through the discarded books at our local library and came across a book about a raven who thought her feathers were ugly and wished for beautiful feathers like other birds. The moral of the story was that we all have unique traits and abilities that make us special, and by accepting ourselves and our individuality, we can live happier lives than if we try to be something we're not. I found it touching and perfect for my daughter, Raven, so I bought it and took it home. Later that day, when I went to read it to her, I opened the front cover and noticed a sort of sticker or plaque inside. It said that this book had been donated to the city's library system, among several others in my grandfather's name after he died. I dropped the book in shock as a chill ran up my spine. There it was, his name, his date of death, and a blurb about how important children's education had always been to him, and how he believed children are the future. He had left a sum of money in his will to our city's public library system, specifically to purchase books for the children's sections. I called my mom and told her about it. She was stunned. She knew this had been part of his will, but that was all. So here I was, picking up a book at my local library, one of many in a big city, about a raven, my daughter's name, who learned to love herself for who she was. It had always been my grandfather's message to me. This book had been donated by my grandfather's estate to the library system 15 years earlier, and on the day it was discarded and put out for sale as a used book, I happened to buy it and only discovered the plaque inside when I went to read it at home. It felt like a gift from him to me and my child. I can't even fathom the odds of that happening. I've never been a believer in the supernatural, and I don't think my grandfather's ghost somehow arranged this, but it does seem like more than just a coincidence. I like to believe that his spirit still checks in on me and my kids. I don't know how else to explain it. It still sends a chill up my spine, and at the time, I felt such a sense of love and comfort. I have missed my grandfather for many years now. My daughter is 14, the age I was when he died. She's long since outgrown that story, but I keep the book close just the same. Story 5. I was home alone, laying down on my living room floor and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house. Not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone, and I ask her if she is all right. She responds that she is, and tells me to hold on for a minute while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I heard a lot of noise, and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before Mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her, before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been hit dead center. We always joke that we are psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we have had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. Story 6. I was home alone, sleeping, when all of a sudden I felt a presence crawling onto my bed. I could hear the sheets rustling and feel the bed sinking. At the same time, I heard soft laughter growing louder and more intense as it got closer to me. Finally, after what felt like it was right next to my ear, I woke up. As I turned my head to see what the hell was laughing at me, I saw a nondescript figure hovering over me and burst out in what I could only describe as the most aggressive laughter, all while shaking my bed violently. My head felt like it was being rattled from all the shaking. At that moment, I wanted to scream as loudly as I could, but I couldn't summon the strength to even turn my head away from what I was seeing. I was terrified and angry. Angry at myself for being so scared and not able to even attempt to defend myself from this creature that had spent what felt like minutes taunting me. When I finally managed to muster the strength to fight back, it had already disappeared from the room, its laughter echoing behind it. It turns out I have schizophrenia, and this was the first of many hallucinations that plagued me throughout my late teens to mid-20s. With therapy and the early realization that it might be mental illness, I was able to keep myself relatively sane. That was almost 15 years ago. It's gotten better, and these days it doesn't happen as often, but when it does, it's usually whenever I experience severe stress in a short period or moderate stress over a prolonged period. Edit. Thank you all for the well wishes about my mental illness. I should clarify that before this happened, I already suspected something was wrong, mostly auditory hallucinations. I would hear familiar voices when the people whose voices they were clearly weren't there, such as at the doctor's office when I was sitting by myself, or a very loud foghorn-like sound at home when I was alone. I also heard distant, indistinct conversations in empty rooms, and the voices would stop the moment I stepped into the room. I'd hear static noise wherever I went, and remember events or conversations with friends that never happened. But this was the first full-blown sensory hallucination I ever had, with more following whenever I tried to sleep at night. Sometimes they happened every day, other times every other day or week. With all these little things being off, it's easy to see how people with schizophrenia can become paranoid and spiral down even further. I guess it really boils down to whether or not the individual can objectively assess what is happening to them. I was lucky. I was already going to therapy for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. My alcoholic father, his family, and my older brother were my abusers, and at one point when we were children, my father attempted to take his own life. I did as well, not long after. So yeah, my stress growing up was through the roof. Thanks to the techniques and practices I learned in counseling, I didn't hesitate to bring this up to my doctor because there is nothing wrong with seeking help. The calming techniques really helped me bring my illness to a manageable level. My experiences on medication, well, that's a story for another time. Oh, and almost forgot. Yes, that was in fact sleep paralysis. I've had it before, but this was the first time I was fully conscious during it. Whenever I had it before, I was always in a semi-conscious half-dazed state. This time I was fully awake. Eyes open, I felt its weight and its breath as it laughed in my face. It smelled like cherry medicine for some reason. Also, before anyone asks distastefully, no, the voices never told me to do anything or harm anyone. There was a lot of berating, though, and it wasn't carbon monoxide poisoning. It's state law in California that every home must have a carbon monoxide detector along with a smoke detector, and my bed was no more than 3 feet from the carbon monoxide detector. Story 7. I don't remember this, but my parents told me the story many years later. When I was a toddler, I used to talk to myself in bed at night. My parents, assuming I had developed imaginary friends, thought nothing of it until one night, out of curiosity, they decided to listen. That's when they heard me say, "Don't worry, Pawpaw, I will protect him." There are 2 creepy things about this sentence. First, my great-grandfather was called Paw Paw by my dad when he was a kid. Paw Paw died when my dad was 11. My parents never mentioned him to me, and later it was confirmed that no one else had either. Second, the next day was the day of the Super Bowl. For non-Americans, it's essentially a huge televised American football game, usually held in February. That day, I threw a tantrum, something I never did. I started yelling at my dad, who was holding me. "Don't leave! You'll get hurt." Right after I said this, my dad slipped on ice, broke his leg, tore his anterior cruciate ligament and posterior cruciate ligament, and basically injured everything else. When my mom took me to the hospital, I kept telling her, "It's all my fault. He told me to save him," over and over. Later, when my sister was the same age, she would scream in her bed every night saying there was a man in her room. When she described him, it matched the description of Paw Paw. Story 8. When I was 14, I had just moved to another state. My bedroom was sparse. I didn't even have a bed frame, just a mattress on the floor. Next to my bed was an alarm clock with large red numbers. I lay down, put my head on the pillow, and looked at the clock. The time was 10:24. I blinked. Literally blinked. The clock still said 10:24, but it was morning. Light was coming through the window. I swear I hadn't slept. I literally blinked, and suddenly it was 12 hours later at the exact same time. I spent the rest of the day in a tired haze, as if I had stayed up all night. All I know is that I had just gone to bed and blinked, and now it was morning. Every time I hear those conspiracy theory shows on the radio about time skips, wormholes, and things like that, I wonder if that's what happened to me. It's by far the freakiest thing that has ever happened to me. It. The reason this is so freaky is that I take an extraordinary amount of time to fall asleep. I am not one to just go to bed and fall asleep instantly. I envy people who can. Usually, I will feel sleep coming on, but in this case, I remember not even being tired. Couple that with the fact that it was a blink, not an "oh, I am tired, I am going to rest my eyes for a few seconds." Blink, but a full-on blink, the automatic brain-driven response to lubricate my eyes. When it was instantly morning, there was no grogginess or waking up feeling. It was a sudden passage of time, no different from 1 second to the next. Also, the time being exactly the same is what stuck with me the most. 10:24 has always stayed in my head because of this. Story 9. When I was maybe 5/6, I was staying with my nan, my grandma, and I would always sleep with her in her bed as she was divorced, and I guess it's just nice to sleep with your grandkid. Anyway, there was one night in particular that freaked me up. I still to this day have no idea what it was, and I haven't really thought about telling her because, she's alone in the same house to this day. I was sleeping, and I had an urge to wake up. I thought I heard my nan walking to the bathroom. I sat up, still half asleep, and it was indeed my nan coming out of the bathroom, which was directly aligned with the bed as she slept in a master bedroom with an ensuite. My nan just decided to stand at the end of the bed with one finger over her mouth, as if she was telling me to shh. I kept asking her what she was doing, and she just did not answer me. I had another urge to look next to me. Again, I have no idea why I didn't notice this sooner, because it was a good 2 to 3 minutes of me trying to speak to her. When I looked to my left, My Nan was sound asleep. How she didn't hear me having a full-on conversation, I don't know. The creepy thing is, when I realized that my Nan was next to me, this thing that was impersonating my Nan smiled like a terrifying smile, and I hid under the blanket and did not move. I eventually fell asleep and woke up in the morning to find her still asleep next to me. I am very open-minded. I believe in the afterlife. Ghosts, supernatural, you name it. I believe it. But I still have no idea what this thing was. Even thinking about it now gives me the chills. Was it a shapeshifter? Or did my dad watch too many episodes of X-Files around me? Don't know. Story 10. A few years back, we had a cat. He was an outdoor cat at the time, and he would play in the field and barn behind our house. I'd play with him too, and I'd be the one to feed him. He would come to the door whenever he wanted food, and I'd go out our side door to the patio to set it down for him. He came to the door, meowed a few times, and we got him the food. He proceeded to run off, so I assumed he went to the side door to greet me. I go out the side door, and he's nowhere to be seen. He's just gone. At this point, it's around 11:30 at night, so it's almost pitch black. I had a flashlight and started to make my way to the patio, and I felt this sense of absolute dread come over me. I froze and just listened. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, I could only listen. Eventually, I managed to back up to the wall of the house, and I heard something moving way ahead of me. I turned off the flashlight so they wouldn't be able to see me. And I see right at the point where the ground you can see just sort of fades into blackness, 2 feet walking past. But what got me was that they weren't human feet. They were long and gray and shaped like the hind legs of a deer or a dog. The best example I can think of are Lupin's werewolf legs in Harry Potter. It couldn't have been a human because of the shape, and it couldn't have been any of those animals because there were only 2. They just kept walking right across in front of me and disappeared behind the shed. I stayed still for a little bit and proceeded to kite around in the other direction to see what the hell that thing was. I turned the light back on and made my way slowly around so I could see around the shed with a good amount of light, and a tiny orange kitten that I recognized as our neighbors came strolling around the corner, looked at me, mewed, and sat down on the patio. I felt intense relief and made my way back inside after setting the food down. To this day, I have no idea where the cat went, nor do I have any idea what that thing had been then, but I felt legitimate fear at that time. Story 11. I work the night shift at a hospital. I also work in the basement next to the morgue. Needless to say, I am somewhat used to weird things happening, random objects falling off shelves with no one around, flickering lights even though we're on a generator, and so on. None of that really creeps me out, and I don't exactly believe in ghosts. But one night, a few weeks ago, around 3 a.m., I heard a loud, horrid scream come from the hallway right outside. It sounded like a woman shrieking straight out of the movies, and it lasted 2 or 3 seconds before stopping. There was silence for a few seconds. I listened for a follow-up footsteps conversation. A thud, anything like someone collapsing, but nothing. Complete and utter silence followed. I waited a moment before asking my coworkers if they heard what I just heard or if I was going crazy. They heard it too. We all stood there, stunned and silent. I checked the long hallway but saw nothing. No one could have gotten far enough to be out of sight unless they were running, in which case I would have heard their footsteps. All the doors in the hall were locked since it was night shift and nothing was open, so they couldn't have escaped into a random room. I still have no idea where the scream came from. It's bone-chilling. Whatever it was sounded like it had witnessed death. I can still hear that scream in my mind. I am not easily spooked, but that was definitely something that still baffles me and freaks me out to this day. Story 12. I had a roommate who was always a complete a-hole, never polite or kind to anyone. One night, after helping his drunk self to bed, he turned to me and said, "I really appreciate you, and I know you don't like seeing me like this." You've been a good roommate and friend. Thank you." The next morning, I found him dead from an undiagnosed heart condition that alcohol had exacerbated. It wasn't creepy or freaky in the usual sense, but I will never forget how serious and genuine he was in what turned out to be the last words he ever spoke. It was the first time I had ever heard him compliment anyone. Story 13. I worked at a Subway during a time when a serial robber was hitting multiple locations each day and becoming increasingly violent. I happened to work at one of the easiest targets of them all, just one employee on night shifts, not located in a shopping center, tucked away from the main road, and with a small tree-covered parking lot. The cops would even come by at night to check on me because they were so sure this guy was going to hit our store. One night, a man came in and started fidgeting with the front door. He said he thought something was wrong with it, but then said it seemed fine. He was really nice the whole time, but he started asking some odd questions, like what time I got off work, especially with all the robberies going on. I thought it was suspicious, so I lied and told him I left later than I actually did. Later that night, I turned on the alarm and went to close the door, but it wouldn't shut at all. The alarm went off, and cops flew into the parking lot. One of them started inspecting the door and found a tiny magnet that had been placed there to keep it from closing. The guy had stuck it there earlier so I wouldn't be able to lock up. While this was happening, a car rolled slowly through the lot, but everyone assumed it was just someone curious about the alarm. A couple of days later, they caught the guy. It was the same dude. I saw footage of his car, and sure enough, it was the car that drove by while I was still there with the cop. Story 14. In 1991, I went to a 7-Eleven by myself while we were visiting my grandmother's house. There was another kid there around my age. We looked similar, and there wasn't much to distinguish us. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house, and that was that. That other kid was kidnapped and murdered pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some kind of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it, but they could never prove it. To this day, it still weirds me out. I am 41 now, and I live in that same neighborhood. Story 15. One night I had a dream that a coworker offed me with an axe. And when I got to work the next day, she was telling a coworker that she had a dream that she offed me with a knife. Sort of an odd coincidence. She never did try to off me, but it was a little bit creepy. Story 16. When I was about 10, I had a huge fear that someone might be hiding in our house, so much so that I wouldn't even go into the basement because it scared me. Looking back, I am actually glad I had that fear. One summer night, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard a noise coming from above me. I freaked out a little but didn't see anything right away. Over the next few days, I started to notice that my room was unusually hot, which was strange since we had just gotten new air vents installed. My dad was checking out the vents and left the room to grab a tool. That's when I saw the scariest thing I've ever seen, a skinny man staring down at me and my dad from inside the ceiling vent. I froze. I pretended I hadn't seen him and quietly left the room to get my dad. In my 10-year-old mind, I was ready to run out of the house with him, but I was scared to leave my 2 cats behind. So instead, I grabbed a paper towel and a pen, and in my messy, childlike handwriting, I wrote, "There is a man in my vent." My dad couldn't read it at first and asked what it meant. That's when we heard a loud thud. He looked at the note again, and something must have clicked, because he immediately grabbed me and called the police. When my mom got home, she arrived just in time to see the man being dragged out of the house in handcuffs. Even though he was caught, and things turned out okay, the image of looking up and seeing that man's face, and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream, still haunts me to this day. Story 17. My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but to this day, we still don't know how or why. We're 6 years apart, but went to the same small high school at different times, graduating classes of about 60 students. Years later, we were on a road trip together, several states away, and decided to stop at a Huddle House for some coffee. We walked in, and a man at the next table turned around, smiled, and said, "You went to Anytown High School, right?" When we said yes, he pointed to the woman with him, his girlfriend apparently, who was also smiling but silent, and said they had gone there too. We didn't recognize either of them, but we smiled politely and said something like, "Small world." Then the guy started rambling about different things from the school, random disjointed comments that didn't quite add up. He spoke almost like a salesman, rapid, rehearsed, and off-kilter. At first, we just nodded along, but then we noticed he was getting basic facts wrong. So we asked what year he graduated. He claimed he couldn't remember. We asked a couple of follow-up questions, and he got noticeably cagey. Then, out of nowhere, the woman said, "This isn't working," and they both quickly paid and left without touching their food. Since then, we've figured out they definitely didn't go to our school, but we still have no idea how they knew enough details to target us like that or what they were actually trying to do. Story 18. I was alone in the house with my stepdad. I went to the bathroom, and as I sat down, I suddenly saw the doorknob turning. Someone was trying to open the door. I pushed it back and said, "Occupied," but whatever was on the other side kept trying to get in. I called out to my stepdad, and I heard him respond from the kitchen, "Yeah?" At that point, I was terrified. Suddenly, the doorknob stopped moving. I finished up, then checked the entire house for anyone else, but there was no one there except my stepdad. I ended up going to the other bathroom instead, still shaken. To this day, I have no idea what or who was on the other side of that door. A few things to consider. 1. I didn't have any pets at the time. 2. My stepdad was in the kitchen, which is right next to the hallway that leads to all the rooms, including the bathroom. There's no way someone could have gotten to the hallway without being seen or heard. 3. Wind can't turn a doorknob. Story 19. One evening, for some reason, I thought about someone I had gone to college with, someone I hadn't seen in over 30 years. Out of curiosity, I decided to Google her name to see what she had done with her life. I found her obituary. It had been posted earlier that very day. If I had searched for her just one day earlier, I would never have known she had died. Story 20. I came downstairs to tell my grandmother, "Daddy is sleeping with his eyes open." He has type 1 diabetes and had been drinking. He took insulin to counter the rise in his blood sugar, but he wasn't paying attention and took too much. By the time the ambulance arrived, we lived on the outskirts of a small town without a hospital. He was about 5 minutes away from death. If we had waited any longer, he wouldn't have made it. Please take care of your diabetic friends and loved ones. If something seems off, trust your instincts because it probably is. Know what to do in case of a high or low blood sugar emergency. This is important even if you're not close to someone with type 1. It could save a life. Always be prepared. Story 21. Mom died 5 months ago, and I moved across the state into her apartment to be closer to family. One night, I swear I heard her call my name. It felt so natural hearing her voice in her own apartment, but she'd been dead for over a month. I am sure it was just a near-asleep hallucination, but it was definitely spooky. Story 22. I used to sleepwalk as a child. Usually I'd wake up in the living room, or sometimes I'd scare myself awake in the basement. On one occasion, I wandered outside. I was 7 or 8 years old when I woke up standing in the middle of my backyard on a super foggy morning, just around sunrise. I quickly figured out which direction my house was and ran back to bed. I never told my parents about it because I thought they'd be mad at me for going outside when I should have been asleep. Story 23. We moved into a new place that was built around 1930 and had a fire sometime in the 70s. My 3-year-old, at the time, started running around the house playing hide-and-seek with himself. Kids weren't allowed in our room, but our room was on the first floor, and the closet was actually the space under the stairs. He kept running in there, shouting, "Found you. Hide better." We didn't think much of it. New house. Kids have imaginary friends. Until that night, when he asked if Sam could sleep in his room, he said she was lonely, but now that they're friends, she could sleep with him. She didn't want to sleep in the closet anymore. No one else ever saw her, and weird things rarely happened. We moved a year later, and except for the day after we moved, when he asked if Sam could come too, he has never spoken of her again. Story 24. Most of my life, I've had what I call normal life prediction dreams, where I have a very vivid dream of myself and two of my friends driving on a road I know after seeing a movie, and then it actually happens sometime later. More recently, I had a dream where I was running late for work. I hopped in my car, turned the key, and the car exploded, sending me to the emergency room and keeping me hospitalized for about a year. I remember it being very sunny, and I was wearing a gray shirt that said, "Technically the glass is completely full," along with a Legend of Zelda hat. Well, lo and behold, I was late for work, and the shirt and hat that were easiest to grab were those two. I stepped outside and was blindsided by the sun. I decided to call off work that day, claiming I was taking a personal health day and had my stepdad come look at my car. It turned out there was a problem with the fuel line and oil, so it would have been bad if the key had sparked. The car was already on death's door, so we just sold it for parts. Story 25. One that I can remember. I own a split-level apartment and live on the bottom floor. The old upstairs tenant would sit outside smoking cigarettes, drinking, and watching videos on his phone until about 4 or 5 a.m. every day. We live in an okay part of the city with some major crime issues. One night, while sitting out there, he was the victim of an attempted armed robbery but didn't give anything up. At this point, my work and sleep schedule were getting completely out of whack, causing some really weird dreams and unusual sleep habits. Where he sat every night was right next to my bedroom window. I told him that if he was ever in trouble, to bang on my window and I would come outside as soon as possible. One night, weeks later, I was woken up by Frantic banging on my window. I grabbed the pistol I keep next to my bed and sprinted outside wearing only my underwear. I had to exit out the back of the house and run around to the front, where I was greeted by an empty porch and a dead silent, empty street at about 4 a.m. I asked him about it the next day, and he said he wasn't even outside that night. The most disturbing part was just how real the sounds were. Story 26. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment with a den. In the den, we had a spare bed for visitors or whatever. One night, my boyfriend was very sick, so I went and slept in the spare bed. In the middle of the night, I experienced what seemed like sleep paralysis. I couldn't move but was seemingly awake. In that state, I saw a dark figure walk into the room and stand over me for a while, right above my face. The next day, I was very freaked out. I told my boyfriend and he asked if I was joking. That same night, he saw a dark, shadowy figure pacing in front of our bedroom bed. He said he slept with the light on all night, which explained why it was still on the next morning when I went into the room. This happened about a year ago, and we haven't talked about it since. We'd rather forget that entire night ever happened. Story 27. Two friends and I got bored one summer night and decided to drive up into the mountains to a spot that overlooks the town. It's a rough dirt road and we were in a Volkswagen Rabbit. We finally made it to a little clearing on the side of the road and pulled over. There were no houses on that road for miles, and we didn't see any other vehicles the rest of the night. We got out of the car. It was pitch black, except for the lights of the little town at the bottom of the clearing, miles away. We were all a bit uneasy as we stepped out when something caught our attention. We all turned and looked at the same time and saw something running through the woods about 30 feet away. It looked like a person, except it was glowing, kind of like those glow-in-the-dark stars you could stick to your ceiling. It glowed at about that intensity. We watched as it ran, pushing branches out of its way. Without saying a word, we all got back in the car and started driving off in total silence. About 30 seconds later, someone finally said, "What the heck did we just see?" The best answer we could come up with, crazy as it sounds, was that we saw a ghost. All three of us agreed we saw the exact same thing. A couple of years later, I was with the older brother of one of my best friends, just shooting the breeze. I brought up the story, expecting him to laugh, but instead he looked shocked and asked if I was serious. Apparently, his high school teacher had told them he saw the exact same thing run across that road one night. That made me feel a little less crazy. Story 28. This literally happened Friday night. My son is about 10 months old and absolutely hates sleep. He'll sleep in his crib until about 3 or 4 a.m., then wake up screaming for a bottle and spend the rest of the night in our bed. Friday night, he woke up screaming. I got up and went to the kitchen to make him a bottle. I turned toward the nightlight in the kitchen so I could pour the water to the right level when I heard a woman humming behind me in a soothing way. It wasn't just a quick hum. It lasted a full 10 seconds of HM. As soon as the humming stopped, my son started screaming even harder. I dropped the bottle and rushed to check on him in his room and then to our bedroom to make sure it wasn't my wife. He was fine and she was sound asleep with the door still closed like I'd left it. I had to wake her up. He has no toys that make the humming sound, I heard. I still have no idea what the heck it was. The freakiest part was how hard he screamed when it stopped. Story 29. 3 times in my life, I have awoken to see the same golden grid projected on my wall, twice in my youth, and once more a few years ago. It resembles a projection of light that has passed through a yellow patterned glass, but that's not likely because my first bedroom didn't have windows. The light didn't move, and when I placed my hand in it, the light did not project onto it. It fades after about 1 minute, and I go back to sleep. Story 30. Around a decade ago, I experienced what can only be described as an inner body hallucination. It started with a numb feeling in my ankle that slowly spread up my leg over time. But when the feeling reached my knee, things got very strange. It felt like there was a direct connection between my ankle and my neck. If one moved, the other moved automatically at the exact same time and by the exact same amount. It was impossible for me to move one without the other, and the precision of their movement would take someone a very long time to fake properly. Unsurprisingly, this freaked me out hardcore. Luckily, I was already at the hospital, waiting in the waiting room while this was happening, but the sensation kept crawling up my body, now affecting both legs. Eventually, it reached my rib cage, and that's when things truly started to get freaky. It felt like the bones in my rib cage were slowly coming loose and floating around in my stomach, moving clockwise in perfect rhythm with my breathing. By this time, I was completely hysterical because it genuinely felt like my bones were coming loose, and I was convinced I was dying. It wasn't until almost 30 minutes later, when they took an X-ray of my chest and showed it to me, that I began to understand that nothing was physically wrong and that it was all in my head. The doctors assumed I had taken some kind of hallucinogen, so I was tested for every drug they could think of, but all tests came back completely clean. They were baffled as to what could have caused it since I had never experienced anything remotely similar before. The scariest part was how real it felt. The hallucinated sensations were indistinguishable from any other physical sensation in my body, and it dawned on me that I could no longer fully trust my senses. There was no difference between the hallucinated feelings and any other sensations I've ever had. More than 10 years later, I still don't know what caused it. From time to time, if I think about it too much, I still feel ripples of the effect. Specifically, the sensation that a bone near my kidney or another organ in that area is coming loose and revolving in a circle around it with each breath I take. I haven't really told this story to many people because I know most would just assume I am crazy. Story 31. My girlfriend, now wife, called me one Monday night and told me she had an uneasy feeling that something horrible was about to happen. She kept repeating it but couldn't really explain the feeling. She had never said anything like that before, and hasn't since. Of course, earlier that day, I had, unbeknownst to her, picked up her engagement ring and was holding it when she called me. So, as you can imagine, that didn't exactly boost my self-confidence. That was September 10th, 2001. Story 32. I was with a circus group renting an Airbnb in Vegas. One late night, I was the first to come home and found the front door wide open. There was no van or any sign of anyone outside. I went inside and did my best impromptu search and sweep, untrained and deathly terrified. No one ended up being there, but I remember the tension of imagining someone silently waiting to ambush me in every room. The house had a weird, spacious layout, so I couldn't keep track of everything. It was a very stressful night. Story 33. One night, when I was walking outside at 1 a.m. to get a pack of cigarettes and chill in a park, I saw a person at an intersection while nobody was around. He just kept staring into the distance, not moving an inch. My body told me this is something I should not be dealing with, but my mind thought I should maybe talk to him. "Hey! Hello!" I couldn't garner a response from him. He would still remain completely still. I decided I don't want to cross the street with this guy, so I decided to take a long way to the park. Right after I walked right away from this guy, he suddenly turned around and started to follow me. Silently. At this point, I am totally freaked out. My fight or flight just went on, thinking that I should rather run away than be kidnapped, attacked, or something else. I came across a guy who happened to be the way I was running in. I told him to not go to the area and if he please would call the police. He just walked away, not willing to help me. So I kept sprinting, thinking the guy was still on my foot. When I was several streets away, I decided to wait and hide there. I saw the guy looking out of the street. I just came from blank emotion and everything. Then he just slowly turned around and walked away. Needless to say, I don't go that route anymore. Story 34. More odd and creepy than scary, but recently I was at the mall with my wife, and in this store we noticed a very comically dressed man who looked like a Zach Galifianakis character sitting on a bench at the back of the store. We both noticed him and commented on him to each other. Then we saw him get up and leave via the front of the store. Maybe 15 seconds later, we looked again toward the back of the store, and he was back, sitting on the same bench all the way at the back. We saw him exit the store, and even if he immediately turned around and came back in, we would have seen him walk by us. He straight up teleported back to that bench. Story 35. As a college student, I worked security on my college campus. Plenty of strange stuff. Walking through a chapel at 3 a.m. when someone decides they should start playing Phantom of the Opera on the large pipe organ. High school cheerleader seizing in the shower. Attempt to off oneself and a few burglaries. The creepiest. We also had responsibility for a church adjacent to campus. Not a huge church and probably about 40 years old. If I were to guess, doing my rounds, first walking the exterior and then walking through the interior at about 3:30 a.m., I hear a toilet flush and footsteps go down the hall, except there is no one in either the bathroom or the hall. In fact, I am standing in the hall. We could see the bathroom, called other staff over, and did a complete search, including the boiler room that could have been from a horror movie. Nobody there and no signs of entry. A year or so later, a co-worker claims to have been walking past the church and saw a lady staring him down, partway behind a curtain, looked like she was from the 1950s or 1960s, with cat glasses. So, yes, I think it is haunted. Story 36. I was staying over at a friend's house one night, and her room was small, so we were sleeping in the same bed. She was lying on the inside of the bed against the wall. I was on the outside. I started dreaming about being at work, a pretty normal dream, but all of a sudden the tone of the dream changed. It went from being an average dream to a nightmare. I was hiding from a serial ender who was wearing a kabuki mask. I hid in a freezer, but the ender found me and was about to shoot me, and I woke up to something even more horrifying. I was lying with my back to the room, and although I was awake, I kept my eyes shut. I felt someone gently stroking my hair. Someone leaned in close, and I heard a raspy voice whisper to me, "Hello there, little girl. Everything will be fine," and something cold and heavy being pressed to the back of my head. This is how I die, I thought. But for some reason, I decided to fight back and rolled over suddenly and punched the air, willing to fight the person about to end me in my sleep. There was no one there. The bedroom door was shut. The next day, I told my friend about my horrifying dream, and she shrugged and said, "Oh, my house is haunted," like it was nothing. I never stayed over at her house again, and I haven't had a dream like that since. Story 37. Late one night, around 11 or so, I was in my bed watching some television. I usually go to sleep around 10. As I started to fade into sleep, I heard faint footsteps from my kitchen. My kitchen isn't far from my bedroom. My eyes opened wide after that, and I peeked toward the kitchen. When I looked, I saw the fridge wide open. I remember the fridge being closed. I usually drink or eat before I sleep, before I went to bed. So then I went to close it and came back. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 38. I was sleeping on my grandmother's couch and woke up around 12:30. I snuck out to the old gravel driveway to smoke. My grandmother lived out in the woods off a dirt road. While I was smoking, I saw a crescent-shaped object moving across the sky. It was the exact size and shape as the moon that night. This was maybe early 2000. It still gives me chills. Story 39. My younger brother has Down syndrome, and because of his anxiety, behavior, and other medical issues, he takes medication about 4 times a day. It's such a normal routine that my entire family, including him, knows never to mess around with his medicine. One night, my parents were away on an overnight trip, and my 2 younger brothers and I were left home alone, with me in charge. When it came time to give my brother his meds, he insisted he had already taken them. I asked my other brother if he had given them to him, and he swore he hadn't, because medication was such a serious matter, and all of us knew better than to mess with it. I believed them both. I asked my brother, who claimed to have taken the meds, to describe the person who gave them to him. He said it was a tall, dark-haired, mean-looking man. At the time, I thought he was just being difficult and fed my brothers their supper before putting them to bed. Around 2 hours later, I was about to go to bed when I noticed a strange, muddy footprint right in front of the door. I felt a chill run down my spine, but tried to brush it off and went to sleep. Then, in the dead of night, I woke up and swear I saw a tall, dark-haired, mean-looking man staring into my bedroom. It's the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me. Story 40. Someone attempted to kidnap me in a park. Thankfully, I was 13 and a little smarter then. He came up to me, grabbed my wrists, and kept screaming, "You're coming with me." I don't think his grip was very strong because I was able to break free and run away as fast as I could. I gave a statement to the police, and he was arrested. Story 41. I stayed in a hotel with my GF. We went down to the pool for an hour, and when we came back in the room, there were about a dozen small handprints on the window. Now I was freaked because we would notice them when we first went up to put our stuff in the room. Later, talking to a guy at the front desk, he said the hotel is haunted, and a lady threw herself and children from the balcony of the floor we were on. Story 42. I was sleeping on a friend's couch while living in Phnom Penh, where houses often have tile that runs up the walls a few feet. After my friend had gone to sleep, I noticed a shadow flickering on the wall. At first, I thought maybe his roommate had come home and was in the kitchen. Curious, I got up to check and walked toward the kitchen to say something, but when I got there, No one was there. Instead, I caught a faint, unsettling smell like dirty humans. My friends had laundry drying in front of a hole beneath the stairs, and as I looked closer, I saw a knee poking out from behind the clothes. Panic surged through me. I spun around and ran straight to my friend's room, banging on the door and yelling that someone was in the house. In Cambodia, break-ins are common. Many of my friends had been robbed while asleep in their own homes or even while walking the streets. But what terrified me the most was smelling the intruder before seeing him and realizing how easily someone could slip into a home without anyone noticing. If I hadn't been on that couch, or if I had already fallen asleep, things might have ended very differently. Story 43. Before I began working in psychiatry, I thought self-enucleation was very rare, as it is typically reported in the literature. However, in just a few years, I've already had 2 patients who self-enucleated both eyes. One experienced drug-induced psychosis, and the other had a first episode of psychosis. It feels surreal to explain what happened to them after their psychotic episodes have resolved, and then to arrange referrals to ophthalmologists, vision services, and so on. Severe psychosis sometimes, but not always, results in poor outcomes, especially when complicated by depression, poverty, drug use, or lack of social support. Before these cases, I would have assumed the prognosis would be especially poor given the added challenge of a physical disability. But both patients took the news surprisingly well. They adapted, engaged fully in rehabilitation programs, and invested tremendous time and effort into living independently and recovering. They made remarkable progress and refused to be held back. I cannot imagine the traumatizing disconnection from reality required for self-enucleation. Those patients have stayed with me for a long time. Story 44. My cousin died in a terrible car accident 2 years ago, and a few weeks ago, my aunt, her mother, passed away. Side note, my aunt died while she was in town visiting my dying grandfather. He died on a Saturday, and the next day she was in the hospital. By Thursday, she was gone. She lived in a different state, so I am actually in town right now for her funeral. Being here made me think of my cousin. I thought about all the cool things we'd probably be doing if she were still alive. The last time I saw her, we talked about me visiting and going on trips together. Yesterday, I had the thought that I wished there was some way I could communicate with her and let her know I missed her and was thinking about her. I am not at all religious or spiritual, so this was a strange thought for me to have. Today, I was driving and passed the spot where my cousin's accident happened. At that moment, the song that played at her funeral, All I Want to Do by Sheryl Crow, came on the radio. I literally shivered. It was probably a coincidence, but it was really comforting. Part of me likes to believe it was her letting me know she was okay because she was with her mom now. It made me happy. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.